Are we ready?
Ready to go.
I'll come back to that.
We should have one for politics. Same
We
thing.
should. Council Chambers. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. I'd like to call to order our Wednesday, September 19th regular meeting of council, and it is just 7 p.m. And as usual, the call to order also comes with a reminder to declare any conflicts of interest if councillors should have conflicts or perceived biases with any of the issues that we're dealing with tonight. This afternoon, Councillor Shanks stepped away, but that just meant he got to leave the meeting early. First item is always the adoption of the agenda. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated? Thank you. And seconded. And are there any additions or deletions? Nothing from staff? No late items? All those in favor of adoption? That's carried. And we have no appointments this evening and no proclamations. So we can move to the adoption of the minutes of the previous council meetings. And the first is Wednesday, September 5th. More volume for the other side of the room, the walls. A little bit more? Okay, I'll get closer to the mic as well. First item is the minutes of the 3 p.m. regular council meeting of September 5th. Motion to receive and adopt. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried. And our regular meeting minutes of Wednesday, September 5th for the 7 o'clock meeting. Yes. Corporate Officer, I'd like to point out a couple of corrections before we move for a motion.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. It was brought to my attention. There is a typo on page 7 under 3.2. The second sentence says Mr. Pearson. It should actually say Mr. Peterson. Staff have noted it and corrected the minutes. And on the top of the following page, page 8, the second paragraph, we refer to Maury Peterson when it should in fact be Murray Peterson. And again, staff have corrected the minutes for the file.
Okay. Thank you for that. And we're in the midst of looking for a motion to adopt. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, yep. Councillor Lutz. Are there any other errors and omissions? Councillor Seegers.
Yeah, Murray. Sorry, just putting a change in there. Page 21. This is during my council report. Just a couple minor things. It wasn't a chamber luncheon. It was a luncheon.
Yes.
And
I think I heard that at the time.
Yeah. Medical assistance in dying is what it is rather than what's written there. And I've already pointed that out to staff.
Okay. So staff have that?
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other errors or omissions? If not, I'll look for all those in favor of adoption to raise their hands, and any opposed. And is there any business arising from those minutes that we won't get to later? If there is no business arising from those minutes, we'll move on to Section 8, the bylaws. And we have a number of bylaws in front of us. And first, in 8.1, could I have a motion to receive the report on bylaw number 569? Thank you, Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried. And I look to the Director of Planning to speak to this.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. The item in front of you is a bylaw for a road closure and disposition. This is related to the BC housing project on High Tide. The rationale behind it is that there is an existing road right-of-way at 24 meters that's right to the south end of that building. By doing the road closure and disposition, it allowed the project manager to move the whole building down to the south, so it gave a much better interface with the existing building. So that was the rationale behind it. This bylaw is looking for second and third reading. It is subject to public notification as per the legislation. And then following that, we would bring it back for approval. I think that's all I have to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I recall in the original report on that project, there's lots of road left over at the end of the this.
To clarify, yes, it was a 24-meter road right-of-way. They're only taking 2, so it still leaves 22 meters, and our standard is 20, so it's well in excess still.
Thank you. Could I have Councillor Mueller?
Be prepared to move recommendations 2 and 3.
Thank you, and that's seconded by Councillor Shanks. Any discussion of this item? It's a good thing to do. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, and we'll get to the, and then we can go directly to the bylaw, which is item 8.1b. Bylaw number 569, 2018, in brackets, High Tide Avenue Road Closure and Disposition. A bylaw to close a portion of a highway and remove dedication of that portion of highway at High Tide Avenue in District Lot 304 and dispose of it to the Provincial Rental Housing Corporation. Is that actually their name? Isn't it the BC Housing Corporation? We may have to amend the actual name of BC Housing. Okay. Could I have somebody move first reading? Councillor Seegers, thank you. And Councillor Mueller, all those in favor of first reading? Any opposed? That's carried. And second reading is moved also by Councillor Seegers and by Councillor Wright, seconding. Any discussion at second reading? All those in favor? That's carried. And with checking the actual, who we're disposing it to, we'll check on that before third reading. Moving to item 8.2. Thank you. Councillor Seegers moving receipt, Councillor Shanks second, and this is again turning to, in this case, the Director of Finance on property tax exemptions.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is the annual report we bring forward to Council for the permissive tax exemptions. This will be for 2019. The requirement is that Council adopt a bylaw prior to October 31st for taxes in the upcoming year. So Council can, by bylaw, exempt certain properties that it wishes to from taxation. Our policy states that Council will typically exempt taxes for places of worship. This would be for the manse and residence areas and the parking lots. Generally, it's the footprint of the church only that would be exempt from taxes statutorily. The policy also allows for properties to be exempt if they're used or held by a charitable, philanthropic, or other not-for-profit corporation. Also, properties that are used for recreation facilities, a public park, recreation ground, or public athletic or public or recreational purposes, and also property that are held by another government that would otherwise be exempt, save for its use. All the properties on this year's exemption list are the same as last year, except for one. There's an additional community service property owned by the Sunshine Coast Association for Community Living. Otherwise, every other property have been exempted in prior years. And so the total estimated value of the permissive tax exemptions from the district side is $220,679, and the total tax exemption for all taxing authorities would be $566,442.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions or clarifications? And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I'm just going to confirm with you, we've talked about this before the meeting, but I just want to confirm on record. On page 42, for the Holy Family Roman Catholic Church, they have a residence. The residence is not tax exempt, correct?
That's correct for the rental properties.
Okay, and then on page 43, for the Sunshine Coast branch of the SPCA, they indicate a portion of the property is sublet. So is that, part of that is as well not?
That is not exempt. Yeah, the assessment, it's only on half the assessment. The other half is still considered taxable.
Okay, and then Sunshine Coast Association for Community Living had, previous years, they've indicated they subleased part of their property to a commercial business. Is that still the case?
I believe it is, and again, we adjust everything as necessary based on the assessments.
Okay, and then Sunshine Coast Lions Housing Society. We had a 10-year tax exemption agreement with them. Where are we at inside of that?
I believe the 10-year agreement has expired, and then they now have to apply on an annual basis. So they're now part of this list to be exempted. So, okay. But they can still apply. It's just now an annual application, and that's based on the current policy that Council adopted several years ago, not to do it for more than 1 year.
Okay, one final. Davis Bay Wilson Creek Community Association, they say there are 3 buildings on the site, 2 of them are leased out. Are those nonprofit or commercial endeavors?
I believe they are commercial, and again, the assessment is adjusted accordingly.
Perfect, thank you. That's all my questions.
Other councillors? Any further discussion? I'd look somebody to move the second recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Mueller. Seconded by Councillor Shanks in this case. All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. And we can move then to the bylaw, which is page 40 and 41. 2019 Permissive Property Tax Exemption Bylaw number 572, 2018, a bylaw for the purposes of exempting certain lands and improvements from municipal property taxation for the 2019 taxation year. First reading is moved by Councillor Mueller and Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? That's carried. Second reading is moved today by Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And we can go for third reading. Third reading is moved by Councillor Shanks, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you for that. And important contribution to the community on a number of fronts. And I was glad to see the social housing broken out on the back page so we could see the contribution that's currently being made by the District of Sechelt and has been made for many years on terms of affordable housing for a number of organizations. Moving to item 8 oh, sorry. No, we did the bylaw. We've done the bylaw? 8.3, zoning amendment bylaw number 25-295. First, a motion to receive the report. Councillor Seegers, I saw your hand, and Councillor Wright. All those in favor? And we go back to the Director of Planning.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Also, before I start, we'll clarify the name on the last bylaw was correct. The Provincial Rental Housing Corporation is the legal name for BC Housing.
Good.
Thanks. So item 8.3, the bylaw that is in front of you, this is a public hearing report and request for second and third reading for the bylaw amendment for microbrewery and microdistillery. The public hearing was held on September 5th. There were 2 speakers at it speaking in favor. So the amendment would be specific to the C2 zones. It is subject to size limitations. The bylaw itself is also subject to some conditions around managing the sewage effluent that was raised as an issue internally. It applies also to the request that it manage sewage treatment capacity, that be checked as part of the condition of approval. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And today, are there any questions or concerns that can be directed to the Director of Planning on this? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. In this bylaw, we indicate that they must pre-treat prior to going into the septic system. We have a bylaw in our books, Bylaw 112, 1990, that actually dictates to the proponents what they have to do prior to putting that forward. So I'm wondering if we need that in this bylaw.
Thank you. Through the chair. I think there's in looking at it, and I did some research before the meeting, I think there's an opportunity. The issue of pre-treatment came up because it can certainly affect the sewage treatment capacity because of the organics related to this. And depending on the size of the microbrewery, it goes up exponentially depending on the size. So depending on what they're doing, it may not kick into that. So what I might suggest is rather than it is pre-treated, that is the requirement, that it be reviewed against the provisions of bylaw 112, 1990, and then it would be the engineer, the district's engineer, who would make that assessment. Based on size. There'd be certain submission requirements from them. And then that might trigger whether pre-treatment is required and what form it might need to take.
So we don't have this at first reading yet, but when we get there, or at second reading, will staff be suggesting an amendment to the bylaw? Is that what I just heard?
Through the chair. So it's requesting for second and third So we could do an amendment to that prior to giving those readings.
And Councillor Seegers, given that you did the research on the 1990 bylaw, does that make sense to you in terms of?
Yes, in that bylaw, it actually indicates the quality that the people who are attaching to the sewer treatment plant or to our sewer system have to fulfill. And this actually would make it easier for really small microbreweries not to have to go to the additional cost to put in the pre-treatment if it's not necessarily required. And that determination would be made by staff and engineering or health, whatever, as they're going through their process.
Well, we'd want it to be done by our staff and to make sure that it fits. And the director?
So just to clarify, so the wording in the bylaw, it says the engineer may require a user of sewer services to provide information needed to determine compliance with this bylaw. That includes discharge peak rates, the chemical analysis of it, so that's where we get into the what's being in there, and then details of sewage pretreatment facilities or the systems to prevent and control those losses. So it gives them the ability to do an assessment on it, and then subject to that, whether their application for microbrewery could be either approved or denied, or whether they need to go into a certain kind of treatment.
And bylaw, was it 112? And that's referring to commercial properties, or what does it capture?
It's not specific to commercial, it's any sewer user.
But residential don't do it? I've never heard of an engineer report on.
We assess capacity as part of our OCP and rezoning amendment, so they certainly look at that, but it's not, to put it delicately, it's a known commodity in residential. In commercial, or particularly industrial users, where you might be introducing a higher chemical load or a different kind of product, we would assess at that stage.
And I think that's actually what I'm asking, to make sure that it captures everyone that we want, and that it is in practice being followed. And so if it's something that's just fallen by the wayside and we aren't aware of it, then we're going to have to bring it up to another level of attention if we're going to rely on that as opposed to a bylaw itself. So we just want to make sure that it's covered. And I'm going to thank Councillor Seegers for looking that one up. Councillor Mueller?
Yeah, thank you. I would be, of course, in favor of some types of measures that would be taken to decrease the barriers for new establishments in this vein to begin in Sechelt. I see that if you compare us to another municipality on the Sunshine Coast, we have a lot fewer of these establishments. They do provide a vibrancy. They do provide a destination, and it's the craft brewing market is, of course, a large growth industry and employs a lot of people. I was swayed somewhat by some of the comments around expanding the land use zones, and I was curious what staff might have to say. I know it's dealt with in this on an individual basis, but I think in a situation like this where on our zoning, it's been held back potentially, you could say, over the years, we may want to just get it right so that proponents understand that it's welcome. So I'm curious if any land use changes could be recommended at this time.
Through the chair, I think what we could do through the new zoning bylaw, in looking at how some other jurisdictions have dealt with this, is that when you're doing them, so we need conditional use regulations that would help with that. So if we were putting them into the industrial areas, the kind of regulations we need to have in place there is really controlling more of the retail aspect of it and the patios and lounges, so that you're not commercializing your industrial area inappropriately. Putting it into the commercial districts, you usually do the reverse. You usually manage the industrial nature of it so that you're not industrializing your commercial area. So I think we could calibrate that fairly well by allowing it into a number of different zones, but we just calibrate the specific use regulations a little differently.
But that's a suggestion for the new zoning bylaw.
For the new zoning bylaw, correct.
So we could get started with this and then make sure it stays on the agenda for with that.
Yeah,
Does
and
that make sense,
if I
Councillor
could
Miller?
just follow up, yeah, I do have some experience with craft brewing. Councillors need to know this is a very low margin business. So any barrier that is there, and whether it be just in the mind or in reality in terms of a fee, and what we're looking at here is a variance, I believe, to allow these into certain types of zones. We got to think about that and the message that sends to proponents.
Okay, any other discussion? Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. Given the conversation in the community about water, one of the lines in here is that there's community sewage treatment capacity. Perhaps we should also put in water capacity, given the amount of water that these facilities use.
They would be metered. Right, as a commercial enterprise, they would be metered for sure, so they'd be on the SCRD metering program. I'm not sure if that would, I'm not quite sure what's being intended, Councillor Seegers, because we don't want to write bylaws for a particular short period of time. We want, but if you think there'll be a water issue over the longer period of time that this bylaw is enforced, then that would make some sense. But
It was just brought to my attention that if you're brewing beer, it takes for 1 liter 8 to 10 liters of water. So I don't know if that's something we want to put in, and that'll be up to council. Thank you.
okay. Councillor Inkster?
I know what Councillor Seegers is saying. It's much like other production. We need to be cognizant of water use, but I'm not clear what she was meaning we should do, because there will be a per liter charge or gigaliter charge or whatever you do in those circumstances. So I know what you're saying. We go through the summer and we hit this point where there's water issues predictably now that climate change, let's remind ourselves of that. So I'm wondering what you're proposing other than the metering system, which will charge, and the money will go back to the system that we're relying on to provide
The
storage.
SCRD regulations allow the various restrictions at stage 3 and 4 as well.
Yeah.
So I think that would probably take care of the drought issue. And I think every candidate I've heard up and down the coast is going to solve the supply issue. So let's have faith. Now, do we need to rescind this is coming forward for second reading, so we could make that amendment at this point to have the language changed in item 2, Q2, and it's been read into the record, so I hope the staff have that, and perhaps the director could read it once more, and then we'll all be sure of what it is, and I'll look for somebody to move. Well, first of all, could I have somebody move second reading, get it on the floor? No, we didn't actually. We just moved and talked directly on the bylaw. So somebody to move recommendation 2, that council proceed. Councillor Seegers and Wright, all those in favor? We're proceeding. Could I have somebody move second reading of bylaw number 25295, 2018, microbrewery and microdistillery, and that was Councillor Seegers and Lutz. At second reading, we'd like to have an amendment, and that will be suggested by the director in terms of language, and we'll have somebody move that amendment. Do you want to read it out once more, just so the staff have it? This is for Q2.
So for Q2, it would be changing it from currently worded, the effluent from microbrewery and microdistillery is pre-treated prior to entering the community sewage treatment system. And that gets changed to that the effluent from the microbrewery and microdistillery be reviewed against the provisions of bylaw 112/1990. That would be it.
Prior to entering the community sewage system. Okay, so
It
we
actually-
strike out pre-treated and add those additional ones. Yeah.
Yeah, it could still leave that. I was thinking,
think
would
we
it be
want-
prior to approval, or would it be prior to being a?
We don't care before it gets into the community sewage
Okay.
treatment system.
I don't even know, I mean,
Yes.
I've not looked at this bylaw and I've seen it for, sure. Yeah, well,
Councillor
I'm
Inkster.
just talking to the chair, but I'll talk this way and try to look that way. I'm not familiar with the bylaw for a number of years now, and I'm wondering if it was originally brought in, that bylaw, thinking back, because I've lived here for a number of years, was it for aquaculture? What was that bylaw for?
It really doesn't matter. It
Okay.
allows us to measure against a number of
Okay.
issues, including the ones that we have in mind. So it was an early attempt to regulate sewage as it came into the treatment plant. And in 1990, it was just the village and a little bit more that was even
Okay.
on it. So it was probably for commercial,
Commercial, okay.
and it will
Because
be
microbreweries would not have been thought of back then, of course, so.
not in the
yeah,
same way.
Yeah,
But I think the language in it is strong enough.
Okay.
And if not, we'll have to look at that bylaw and adjust the bylaw. But I think it's better to refer to a bylaw than to specifically do it in here. I think that's actually a good improvement.
Yeah.
So on the amendment to Q2, which is to strike out the word "is pre-treated" and put in the words about being reviewed against the existing bylaw prior to entering, any further discussion? Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, since this was just raised, I have not had an opportunity to review that bylaw, and I'm hoping that staff have, because to me, it's a material change to what was first recommended to us. I don't know that we'll get a chance between now and fourth reading to actually have a look at that, but I'm curious from the director if she has had a chance to review that in comparison with this instance and if it fits.
Through the chair, the only difference it would make in our applications is rather than it be a condition of approval that they absolutely have a pre-treatment in place, which can be quite costly, is to actually have an evaluation done beforehand. And it doesn't have to be that onerous. Actually, they'd be able to assess based on with their licensing, how large a volume we're looking at, to be able to assess whether they would even need to go that route. So it could be, it just gives the engineer the ability to do that analysis and then advise on whether they need pre-treatment, as opposed to having a condition that they absolutely must before even looking at whether they need it or not. That's the only difference it really makes to it.
So the hope is it would reduce barriers for the very smallest.
It should, yes.
Okay. Makes sense. And I think the other question was, as we haven't had a chance to review it, just came at it tonight, we will have a chance before it comes back for adoption. And the question was whether the director had seen it much earlier than tonight as well. So we want to make sure we're not just making things up on the fly. This is for second reading. We could hesitate on third reading if councillors wanted to, but let's, we do have the amendment on the floor. Hasn't been voted on.
Your worship, you have second reading moved and seconded as amended at this point. If you vote on it, it can be read as amended at second.
I think we had the amendment. Okay, so the amendment has been accepted.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's continue. Any further discussion on second reading? All those in favor of second reading? That's carried. And now the question of third reading, which I think comes to Councillor Mueller's view of whether we want more time to actually go back and review that or whether we can do that before adoption. So I'd see if there's anyone to move third reading. Councillor Seegers and seconded by Councillor Inkster. And the discussion would be, how much time is there usually between third reading and adoption on this type of
Process-wise, it could come back to the next meeting. Operationally, there may be some issues.
Director?
Through the chair, it needs to go out for notification. So there's a
Yes.
notification
Okay, good.
process, and then as soon as that is completed, we can bring it back. I'm not sure if we'd get it back for the third, but we get it back for the one right after that.
Okay, so we have
be the-
2 weeks, almost a full month,
Correct.
which I think should satisfy the opportunity to do some research and verify what the ancient bylaw is. It's even before my time,
yeah.
we say, you know?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if it was before Councillor Shanks's, though.
Yeah,
Not that.
probably wasn't, 1990.
Through the chair, if I can clarify, there actually is a 2013 consolidation.
There's a consolidated
It's-
version?
Yeah, that 1990 wasn't the last time we looked at it. And it's fairly comprehensive bylaw. It goes through all the regulations around hooking up to sewer and the requirements around that. So it's more, this is just one small section of it that deals with the assessment, but it's a fairly comprehensive bylaw.
Okay, thank you for that. And Councillor Mueller?
Yeah, so we have third reading on the floor.
On the floor.
For discussion. I was hesitant to vote for this bylaw, given the concerns that have been raised that it is confining microbreweries and microdistilleries in a very limited area in C2 zone. However, what I really want to get to with my vote is that proponents of microbreweries and microdistilleries know that Seashelt is moving towards a regulatory framework where they can open up with confidence. And for me to vote against this doesn't provide that. I think that we need to move forward and include this in our zoning bylaw in its entirety, and I'd like staff definitely to look at other opportunities for this. This isn't an emerging industry. This is a large employer. It is a generator. We know that when we look down Highway 101, we know that it's affected a lot of aspects of the culture down there in a positive way. We've got communities coming together with the new liquor laws, families. It's become more of a family thing in a positive way. And I think we need to open this up in Seashelt in a way that allows more of these to come. So I'll be voting for it.
Thank you for those remarks, and Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, I think, just to repeat in a sense what Councillor Mueller's saying, I think that the time between third and fourth will be enough to get that information required. This is an application that we didn't hear community concerns on. It's an idea whose time has come. As was mentioned earlier, it will bring some vibrancy to the downtown core, and it's introducing a product and a form of entertainment that's coming to a lot of the downtowns, as has been indicated from many other communities. So I think we should move it forward, get that information, and I look forward. The other issue physically is the building is looking tired, so we probably should hasten some changes that the owner wants to make. So it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think what councillors are speaking to, Councillor Mueller, is that it's always a bit of a question when the bylaw is going in the right direction but not far enough. And you don't want to vote against it. But we get the message, and I think this is the first step, and it was meant to be when it was first brought to us that Seashelt's proceed in a measured way, and I think we'll continue moving that, and the new zoning bylaw will allow that. So all those in favor of third reading? Thank you for that, and third reading is carried, and it'll come back for adoption in about a month. Before us for adoption, item 8.4, and first a motion to receive the report associated with it. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz, all those in favor? Corporate Officer, anything to report on adoption?
Thank you, Your Worship. Per my report, Council Procedure Bylaw number 568 was given third reading at the last meeting with some amendments as set out in my report, and it would now be appropriate for Council to consider adoption. Thank you.
And somebody to move the recommendation that we proceed. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried, and we'll move to the actual bylaw, which is on page 84, well, the part that I want is on page 85. Council Procedure Bylaw number 568-218 is moved for adoption by Councillor Seegers, Councillor Mueller. All those in favor? That's carried. New business and then business items. Item 10.1. Sunshine Coast Community Forest Community Engagement, a report. Motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Mueller, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried. And it doesn't even say we're going to turn to anyone to speak to it, but let's. Yes, a little bit, please. Welcome to our communications manager, Julie Rogers.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Back in June, you said, hey, go talk to the community. We want to know what they think of the community forest, and we want to understand the community's values around the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. So we went out to the community in a variety of ways throughout the summer. We had ads in the local newspapers to promote the opportunities and to educate the community. Because a big part of it was you can't ask them what they think if they didn't know you had a forest. So we did quite a bit of education as well. We created some pages on our website. We did some social media posts. We did a wrap in the local. We had ads on the radio. We had some digital ads as well. Council did 3 pop-up booths, 1 at Canada Day and 2 at the Farmers Market. And we launched into full-on conversations with our community with the first 2 World Cafes. The World Cafes were, I think, a brilliant success. We invited people specifically who hated the community forest, and we invited people who worked in the forest industry, and we invited the entire community to come and sit at tables across from each other and have conversations, and they did. And they came to agreement on some things. They came to appreciate their disagreements a bit better as well. But I think that's where we found the common themes popped out immediately. And then through the rest of the engagement opportunities and the online survey that we had, those themes continued to pop up. I think the most important one was communication. People who know about the forest think that we need to communicate better about the forest because they're surprised at the people who don't know about the forest. People who want to get more involved would like to understand it better so that they can be more involved and they can have real contributions in an informed way. But when you also look at some of the things that people said about it, clearly they don't know very much. You know, they think that board members are overpaid. It's hard to give people less than no money. So there's things that, you know, they're concerned about the Chapman watershed because they don't know that there's a moratorium. They didn't know that there were legacy funds. So there's a lot of things that when you read the comments that they make, there's a lot more education that can be done for the community. So I think that was the biggest thing that came out of it, was just the things that people don't know. They're also really concerned about the environment. They talk a lot about clear cutting and they talk a lot about the watersheds. So some of that is due to misinformation and some of that is just due to lack of information. And I think we can do better in those ways, but also to appreciate that they are concerned. So, you know, are the practices that we have the best that we can do? And that's something for, you know, the board to look at and see if that is the best that we can do. The legacy funds was also a big part of it, ensuring that the legacy funds are supporting the community, but also creating economic benefits to the community beyond a check. Nobody wants to see, nobody wants to see community forest funds go into District of Sechelt operations. But they want to see how it benefits the community. And if there's a way to leverage either the legacy funds or the operations themselves to make sure that we have the maximum economic benefit and job creation on the Sunshine Coast. So we wrapped up on September 10th with our final World Cafe, because in the first ones we heard a lot of conversation about the legacy funds and how those World Cafes really just touched on the surface and they wanted to dig deeper on some of the topics. So we thought we'd throw in an extra one and see how that went. And it was a very good World Cafe. The conversations were excellent. It was unfortunately dominated by people who were in the forest industry in some way. And though we invited community groups, there was only 2 people who identified that evening as being somehow, in some way, members of a community group. So we didn't get as much feedback as I would have liked from the community groups who could benefit the most from the legacy funds. But, you know, having said that, it was still a really great opportunity to find out from the people who came what they think the legacy funds could best be used for. There is still, so while we have wrapped up our portion of the community engagement. The one last bit that is still outstanding is not engagement, but a poll. And the Sunshine Coast Community Forest Board authorized a poll by Innovative Research, the same company that we use for our citizen satisfaction survey. And they, I believe, have just completed it. So we should be getting a report from them very soon. And that report will be a statistically significant one. They did one, I believe, 3 years ago. And so it's the same questions, so that we'll be able to gauge the difference. And we wanted them to do this at the end of our process so that we had the maximum number of people who actually might know something about the community forest because we told them throughout the summer. So we're hoping that that'll lead to a little bit more involved answers and a little more informed. So we'll see how that goes. But as soon as that is available, we will bring that to council as well.
Thank you very much. I'll open it to council. And I see Councillor Inkster first.
Julie, thanks for doing this so laborious process, I guess we'd say, because it was a number of months. It's not as information gathered and as quick as some of the other work that you do. I've been talking about this throughout the process. I just wanted to ask you, in reference to some of my earlier comments, do you feel that you received enough comments from the public to get the information you were looking for? And within that, did you feel that you received enough comments from the people of Sechelt with some clear ideas and direction from them as to how they view their community forest? Because they, in a sense, are shareholders of the corporation.
Yeah, I really think that we did, because there was a lot of concerns expressed at the beginning of this process that, all of the people who, are friends of the people on the board, they're going to speak up the most and we'll only hear from them. Or all of the people from ELF are going to speak up the most and they're going to, completely make everything all bias. And I think we heard from a lot of people. We heard from both sides, if we can put it that way. But we heard from people who didn't know there was a forest until we started this, and are really interested in learning more and really interested in participating more going forward. So I think that gave us a really good mix of feedback from the community. And I think when you look at the online survey, it was 200 and something people participated, which is actually really good for something. It's a community forest. For a lot of people, that's really boring. So that we got that many was really good. But when you look at the survey and you look at the number of comments we got, that's huge, because those were really thoughtful comments. Often when you do online surveys, you'll get, yep, nope, strongly agree, strongly disagree, no comments, done. And so you have no idea why they strongly agreed or why they strongly disagreed. But these people commented in everywhere there was an opportunity to comment. They commented because they've been thinking about it. There's a few that you can, when you read it, you're like, wow, you really have no idea what you're talking about. We tried to, when we did the online survey, every time we provided a link, we actually provided a link to our website where there was a link to the survey to encourage people to educate themselves a little bit before they took the survey. But I think we got a really good broad spectrum of people who are participating, and we encouraged a lot of citizens, I think, to become more involved, and they are now more interested in this thing that they didn't know about before.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate what you've done with this. If we recall, some of the board members on the community forest were not really thrilled to pieces about us taking on this community engagement piece, and we're opposed to it. The interesting change that has happened now is that in conversation with some of the board members, they now start to see the value of what we did. So whether we know it or not, I think we may have taught them something about community engagement and about the community as a whole. So I think it was a very worthwhile exercise. Thank you very much.
I have to say, I think you're absolutely right on that. And I think it's to this council's credit that you charged ahead with it. As as communications manager, I often come across people who are like, ooh, well, we can't ask people what they think. What if they criticize us? And I think that's part of what some of the angst was. Well, people don't understand it, and so they'll criticize us. And then what are we going to do? Like, if they criticize us, what happens next? Well, they did criticize us, but they also praised us. So, you've got a good mix of feedback from the community, and the community had opportunities to have really good conversations and understand opposing views a lot better than they did before.
And Councillor Mueller, and I'll have a few
Yeah,
comments.
thank you. I just want to echo my thanks as well for the very thorough work on this. My question was about the statistical piece, and that's coming. So that totally covers up everything on my list. And all future councils now, and I hope this continues, to go poll the community regularly with the same set of questions so that we get an idea over time what they're thinking. And I know the concern from some was that this would become politicized for major changes to the community forest. But as we've seen, we're finishing this right at the end of this term. The results will be available for the next council to do what they choose with it. And I'm just happy that the community was heard on this. The values are important. The community forest is without a doubt one of the number one assets in the district of Sechelt. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd also echo that I thought it was a really interesting and positive engagement process, and I look forward to a time with more leisure when I can actually look at more of the comments, not just the numbers. And like others, I want to see the survey of the community so I can actually do some cross-analysis. I can't tell from this survey whether the 77% who said they were very familiar with it are the same 70% who thought it was being run very well or very poor, for example, or the 20% who said they were never heard of it, but there's only 12% who have no opinion. So I'm interested in that 8% that have strong opinions about something they haven't heard of. That's the electorate. So other than that, I think it was a very good engagement. I think a little less than you that the World Cafes were, I think they were balanced, but I think when I looked over the list of attendees and heard reports from them, they were very much people who were involved in the discussion and debate prior to the World Cafe. So there were a lot of people, and that would of course set the tone. But I think that was one of the positive aspects. I think that was very important to allow those people to get into the same room and talk, because they have not been talking for several years since they got rid of the Community Advisory Committee. And so that was really useful, and I think finally getting that across to each other was important, and we'll continue that. We'll be able to have a better sense of the actual values, because the other reason we started this was so that this council could build a better relationship between the community forest and the community. And we have to be able to tell the Community Forest Board what those values are so that they can work within them, because they have very clearly, as you found and as we found, don't understand community engagement in the way that we understand it. It's a different meaning and interpretation to them. So I look forward to that, and when we can tease out what those values are, I hope that the next council, because it probably won't be done for this one, will actually write that into the mandate letter and the engagement letter for the community board members when they come on stream. These are the values of your community. This is how you need to operate and work within. So, and one of those values is clearly they want to be engaged and involved. And you helped us do that. So thanks for that. Any further comments on the community engagement process? Then we'll thank you very much, Ms. Rogers, and we'll move to 10.2, the BC Hydro Beautification Grant application. Move receipt. Thank you, Councillor Lutz. Councillor Seeger seconding, and all those in favor. And Arts, Culture, and Communications Coordinator will speak to whether or not we'd like to beautify our town. Ms. Smith.
Thank you. So before you is a report requesting permission to make an application to the BC Hydro Beautification Fund. As you're aware, we have applied for this fund for the last 2 years and have been successful in receiving the 1/3 funding to complete a number of boxes. On Friday, we completed the 3 most recent ones. The application deadline is October the 1st. So because BC Hydro will only commit up to 1/3 of the cost, they do require that we confirm that we are willing to pay the other 2/3 of it at time of application. Of course, this is far in advance of our 2019 budget process. So what I'm hoping is that if we were able to get a confirmation now and for some reason in the 2019 budget process it was determined we didn't actually have those funds, we could go back to BC Hydro and let them know we were no longer able to continue with the project.
Thank you very much. We know what the project is. Councillors are clear. And we have 2 recommendations, one to include it in the budget, one to submit the grant. Councillor Wright, Councillor Seeger seconding. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. And just a bit of process to the Director of Finance. I can't believe every $3,000 expenditure will be coming in front of council and stuff. So isn't there a way that we could sort of know that departmental or unit budgets had enough funds to do things that they would normally do, or they would expect that they would have that and it would just be taken out of operations at some point and they could just proceed with grant applications?
Your Worship, yes, you could. It's really, in this case, is to allow us, when we're making the grant application, to confirm that council has committed these funds, and by having this resolution, that's where it helps. So, in general, you're right. The money just carries over, is rebudgeted from year to year. The community investment program is an example of that, where the money is already in the budget unless you change it.
Yeah, we're getting to have a pretty significant budget without us looking at items of this amount. That's all I'm thinking. Okay, thank you very much for that, and thank you for that
Thank you.
report. And we also have, from the Arts, Culture, and Communications Coordinator, a report on a Vancouver Foundation grant. A motion to receive. Councillor Seegers and Wright. All those in favor? And could you speak to this, please?
Yes. So as you know, earlier this year, Council did agree to be one of the partners in our local reconciliation movement and project. The committee that oversees the reconciliation movement is interested in applying for a Vancouver Foundation grant. And we have our coordinator, Rachel Yordy, in the audience this evening. The committee has already spent some time discussing the grant application with Vancouver Foundation to ensure that it is properly aligned with their goals and priorities for the grant program. And so at this time, we're seeking council permission to make the grant application. If we are successful, there is no requirement for any matching funding of any sort, but simply need permission to actually make the application.
Councillor Seegers, then Councillor Wright, and then...
I'll make recommendation number 2.
Okay. Seconded. Any discussion on this? Now, interesting that from the Vancouver Foundation's point of view, it fits within their mandate of changing systemic behaviors, attitudes in the community. So if we can do that for $20,000. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried, and thank you for thinking of that, and also just the application itself is informative and helps people understand the context of what we're doing here. So hope the members of the public get a chance to read that as well. Thank you very much. And we're in item 11, which is councillors' reports, and I'll start as I often do on the left side of my table and the right side of yours, because we'll return to Councillor Wright for the SCRD board report. So council reports, Councillor Wright.
No, thank you, Your Worship. Attended a number of meetings over the last couple of weeks. Attended the APC, okay, and the Wood Expo. Attended a workshop on the local government. Attended a candidates meeting and the finance committee. And then last night I was at the current mayor's kickoff campaign for re-election, which was kind of fun. And the rest of my time, I won't bore you with what I've been doing, but it's been fun knocking on doors.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That concludes my report.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I attended the Suncoast Racket Club tennis tournament and the gala. Never been there before. It was a lot of fun. And then we had this past week our 100 Women Who Care, where we donated to the Siaya Reconciliation Movement.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, it was good.
Good
There were
choice.
three people there, 3 different organizations, and this was the one that won out, so we gave them the funds. I attended the World Cafe for the Community Forest, Elder College, and I want to commend staff. I mentioned the other group, Joanne and it was Joanne and Ben, right, who did the first one. I want to commend the other staff that came forward on this one. They did an amazing job, and I've talked to a couple of them after, and they said it really opened the eyes of the community. Like Perry, for example, mentioning he has 8 staff, and he does all of the stuff that he does in the community. So it really gave a lot of information to the community, and they've been getting positive comments back from the community on what they do. So that's really good. I attended the AGM for the Davis Bay Community Association, and the I don't know the name of the project. Evolve, does that sound right? Evolve, the project up Field Road.
Yes.
Yes, they were there at the community association presenting information to them. So it was quite interesting to see what they're up to. I attended the library board meeting with a couple of the other candidates. We attended a local government and housing session recently. Of course, I'm having discussions on water, as everybody else is, all over the community. Some people who say they're experts, and then everybody in the community who considers themselves experts. I'm talking with all of them. I also attended the Wood Expo and the electric vehicle event this past weekend. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For community engagement, we should have elections every year on issues. Councillor Mueller.
It is fantastic for community engagement. It's, I like to say it's you go through the election.
You're missing out.
I know. You go through the election, and that sets the stage for the term.
Yes.
And if you don't go out and do the work, then you won't have the stage set. I've been working on just various. One of my last events as a councillor is going to be the Oktoberfest, and that's as a volunteer. But I'll be down there. That's what I've been working on outside of council meetings. But I had a couple things I just wanted to speak about today. I'm sure many of us now have heard some of the news coming out of Gibson's around Mayor Silas White's withdrawal, and I just wanted to say a few words about what a transformational leader I think Silas has been on the Sunshine Coast and actually around BC. He's definitely going to be missed, but of course we understand the situation. Nobody wants to go through that, and the White family have our full support. But there is, without a doubt, no question, I would not be here as a councillor if it wasn't for Silas White. He was one of the first people that recruited me to run for the District of Sechelt, and he's also been a leader in many varieties of work that we've done this term. I've worked with Silas, and he's been somebody who's really provided me a steady ear and a lot of advice. So I know that his community is going to miss him, but I have no doubt that he'll be back as soon as he's able, and he lives for this stuff. He's such a tremendous leader. Can't say enough about it. And another thing I wanted to speak about is about a month ago, I was talking about the UBCM. And of course, it was about the accountability letter sent by, or proposed to be sent by members of the municipality to fossil fuel companies, outlining what they feel is their responsibility for many of the impacts that are going to affect budgets in the municipality. Well, since that time, the UBCM has happened, and I'm here to let you know that resolution failed. 52% voted against that. That is today's cohort of municipal leaders split right down the middle on the defining issue of our time. In the UBCM body, there are many, many resolutions that come through that do not have the weight of this, and they pass. it seems like it's the resolutions that matter that don't pass. But this one in particular, I wanted to point out. We've been let know by the Secretary General of the UN that we have 2 years, 2 of them, to prevent runaway climate change, okay? And in that environment, everyone's aware of this, the science has been clear, very clear for 30 years. We've got half of the municipal leaders in this province voting against holding those that have profited from this in their business model accountable for the impacts. And what they're actually saying is that it's your property taxes that are going to pay for that. And so I think that's egregious. I wish I would have been there to hold them to account and to speak on it. It was very close, and I wish it had gone the other way. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mueller. And 2 topics. I'll come back to Silas myself when it's my turn. And as you pointed out at the end, it was 52-48 of those who were in attendance. And that's an important factor. It was a smaller attendance at UBCM than normal for a number of reasons. Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I was in the room for that count. It ended up being an electronic one because it was so close. The other thing that happens at UBCM is a lot of meetings are going on during resolution time with ministers. So not everyone who could have voted that was there was in the room to vote. So I think in a case like that, if we can somehow control when the resolutions come forward so that the strength of the convention is there to have a proper vote. But that one we have to keep pushing on, you're right. And I want to talk mostly about UBCM because the other meetings and events have been talked about. I attended a couple of different workshops, one of them a town hall on building a better BC. And at that one, we had transportation minister, we had municipal affairs and trade. So it was interesting discussions, but I was quite shocked that nobody talked about transportation as much as I felt we needed to. So I brought up our ferries and our road. And my only disappointment with responses was, yes, we're reading the reports on the highway, we're meeting with the ferry advisory committees, and are looking at park and ride. Well, that was my disappointment. That certainly is not going to solve our transportation problems. So I think we need to work with the community to push that in a different way. One of the other workshops I attended was about not ticking the boxes when you're dealing with First Nations, that we need to meet eye to eye and talk to each other, not send forms and memos and emails. And we had some very good examples of how you can break down some of those barriers just by continually and often having face-to-face meetings. Lots of talk about affordable housing. We had really good speakers. Each of the sitting government leaders spoke to us. But of course, the best one was Selena Robinson with her announcements. I was just amazed that she was given the ability to give all of the announcements out, that our premier didn't hold them back so that he could be the hero and hand them out. So that just gave me a lot of faith in the teamwork of that group. Lots of receptions, lots of social meetings with ministers. We didn't have sit-down talks because for us here in Sechelt, if there's an issue, we can make appointments and get there, whereas the other communities in the province have to travel so far. But I thank Seashell for sending me. It was a very good conference. That's my report.
Thank you very much for that. And Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, not a whole lot to report, Your Worship, other than hearing about the Elder College workshops that took place with staff, and nothing but compliments in terms of the presentations that were made by staff. And I guess that was initiated by a contact with our CAO here, who didn't have any issues in terms of Elder College putting on those things, and got the support of staff. So they were exceptionally well received. I was pleasantly surprised as well at the results of the community foresting engagement process. Probably not being a whole supporter of what was going on there, but ultimately glad that engagement took place and the results of that engagement. I've been talking to a lot of experts on water and affordable housing, like everybody else has, and if they'd only run for office, we wouldn't have any issues whatsoever. Aside from that, I discovered what a weekend was actually like. It's 2 days together where you're supposed to relax. And I did that last weekend. It was coming down buckets, mind you, but I watched football game after football game after football game. And now I'm ready for the campaign, preparing myself by doing the paperwork in the last couple of days. It's a different process than it was a few years ago, but I'm looking forward to it. And I wish everybody that's incumbents and new people running for office all the best in the upcoming election.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Inkster?
Didn't you put up your hand when you first ran, Councillor Shanks? When it's changed
No,
that
it
much?
was the train.
It was the train, yeah. The last couple of weeks, I'm just going to talk about UBCM because there was a lot of, there's been some political stuff going on in Seashell, but that, to me, UBCM is really important in a lot of ways because, as Councillor Lutz mentioned, you get to talk to government contacts and other municipal leaders about issues that they're dealing with. And people know this, but just a quick reminder, communities in BC are dealing with water issues. If they're not dealing with water, they're dealing with forest fire issues. They're dealing with not enough snowpack in the ski communities. And that speaks to what Councillor Mueller was saying, climate change. And Andrew Weaver spoke at the conference for the Green Party leader, as most people should know by now who he is. And he was very pointed, like he's never been before, on the fact that we're ignoring a lot of the sort of the measurables and the factors that are saying that we're hitting a point of no return, and we just seem to be ignoring it. And then it was a good speech, and it put a lot of information in there that I also was able to get from the clean energy discussion about how, we think we're doing so well in BC, and yet BC is falling behind a couple of other provinces in Eastern Canada, but at the same time, we're not doing enough. So there's a lot we need to talk about, and future councils need to talk about, because, where it's either going to be forest issues, or it's going to be water issues, there's going to be sea level rise. And so we need to consider these issues going forward. And we all know that downtown Seashell is not very high above the ocean, so it may not happen in most of our lifetimes, but it's coming. And I should tell Councillor Mueller that Leader Weaver, he did come past where we were talking after, and I spent about 20 minutes with him talking about some of the green issues, and we can probably talk about it if you'd like to, but it was a good conversation, and there's a lot of agreement there. I just wanted to talk about a couple of the other things. The government ministers and leaders and the leader of the government was there. They were there the whole time, and very accessible. And we've seen that in the past, but they're very, I know that Councillor Lutz, she really likes the group that's there. Everyone gets that. But one thing that I noticed was, that I will say, is that the Premier actually, he came right up to me. I thought he had left this luncheon we were at, and he came right up to me, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Did you want to talk to me?" And I don't know who told him that, but who doesn't want to talk to the Premier? So I spent about 20 minutes with him till his security said he needed to go. And he asked me if Yeah, some people know I talk a lot, but what the heck? And
Why the security?
why the security? Well, they were a few feet away. They didn't. They were good. But he asked me a couple of questions, and he asked me what we needed, the BC government needed to do better at, and I said, well, the environment, how you're not doing enough on the file, and people were around went like this, and they said, well, I said, well, he asked, so I told him, and that was good. And I should also mention that in having him there, I asked him about John Fairlake, because I had the premier right in front of me, and I said, this is taking too long. And I also asked the forestry minister, and I also then have been directed to our MLA, and so I talked to him the other day, and he's gone to the ministry involved and is working on the name change and why it's taking so long. So I went to the highest, and I asked Horgan about the environment, about John Fairlake, and about housing, and that was something that he directed me to Selena Robinson. So I talked to her about funding and community assets and some affordability issues. And then I was directed to another ministry to talk about childcare funding in Sechelt. And I passed on some of that information to one of the childcare providers, and I'm going to the next few days. So UBCM this time was just an opportunity to access a number of ministries, find out where the funding is, and they've said it's they're spending within the budget, so it's not going to be a deficit, it's going to be with a surplus. They're spending a lot of money, proposing to spend money in communities. And I've contacted a number of those people. Going forward, I hope Sechelt can work with the provincial government to access funding for people in Sechelt in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to, and it is only 10 after 8, so I'll take a couple of minutes to say a few things about UBCM, and then Councillor and Mayor-elect Silas White, who will not be there. UBCM I went to because I think it's important, and it's important for Sechelt to be there and be represented. I was really pleased, actually, and surprised on Monday morning to find that Elton Toth was there in one of the most important workshops that we were trying to attend, which was on affordability, and I just took that as a really good sign that at least one of the candidates was making an extra effort to find out what it's about and what the issues were. So I was surprised. I was looking over and wasn't sure just why he was there or who he was, but it was a strong indication, Alton. So I'm glad you came up to hear that. And that particular session on affordability had a number of speakers. It was in two halves, but in the second half there was a interesting. I found it more interesting because they had two academics talking about affordability and density, and those links that are much more puzzling than people like to think. But it set out BC-based research on mostly Metro Vancouver, but giving us a strong sense of what was going on. The other, really, I stretched myself far too much at UBCM. It was a busy week in Sechelt, and I was straddling the Howe Sound more than I expected through modern technology. But the important point that I think the other councillors who were there have mentioned is the accessibility of this particular government. And I don't think it's just that this government, but this particular council has some deep and long connections with a lot of members of that government. So it's an easy one for us to interact with because some of them were elected and worked with us in other places and other venues and stuff. But it's not just them. Andrew Wilkinson, leader of the Liberal Party, sat down with Alice and I for probably 20 minutes before one of the lunches, and amenable to listening, and us amenable to listening to him too. And I always find at UBCM it's often a good time to get to know the opposition members, because they're going to be government real soon, maybe sooner than we think. So we took advantage of that opportunity to talk to Mr. Wilkinson. UBCM was primarily about the environmental issues and about affordability, I think, more than anything. And I did attend the sessions on one session on engaging millennials, and that was led by millennials who are active in UBCM, and they brought in a youth council from Nanaimo, which was interesting. And it's a dilemma in terms of the way the world is changing and how we get our full spectrum of the community involved in community issues. But I got some ideas out of that. But I thought UBCM was well worth attending this time, as it usually is. But this time, I guess it's particularly comfortable because we know the government well and we have a good relationship with those a large number of those ministers. A little surprising. Last night at about 10 o'clock, I saw the news that Silas White was going to be stepping down from his role in Gibson's after being nominated and being acclaimed as the only mayoral candidate. And I won't, Councillor Mueller has spoken directly about his relationship with Silas, so I won't go on very much, but it's going to be a real loss to Gibson's and a big loss to the Sunshine Coast. Silas has connected and led in a lot of really positive ways. Last night, when I contacted him almost as soon as I saw the news, and though he's not supposed to have screen time, he responded, and we exchanged, as we often do, as long text messages that should be emails. But I just want to say that our hearts, I was just surprised. I think everyone was taken by surprise about how serious this is, and what's going on is simply awful. And we hope that he'll come back because he has a lot to offer, and I'm sure he will come back. And we just wish him well. I said in one text, it's one of the few times that the words, "my prayers are with you," seems to be the only language even for a secular non-believer. But really, it shows, one of the songs that was sung at the earlier event last night was about how quickly things can change in a day, in 24 hours. And certainly Silas's life and the life of the Sunshine Coast has shifted very dramatically in a very, very short period of time. And I think we need to recall that and think of that both in terms of the urgency with which we deal with things and the commitment that councillors and candidates show to work within their community. And Silas demonstrated those in a number of ways. So our hearts are out to Silas. I hope you're not watching this because it's screen time and you shouldn't be having it. Moving on, SCRD board report. It's been a little slow there too, I think. But tomorrow we talk about water.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, as we all know, the regional board doesn't meet during the month of August. So consequently, there's only been one committee meeting, and that was a planning committee meeting. And there were 15 reports on the planning committee, none of which Sechelt could vote on. They were all rural planning issues. Everything from variances to provincial referrals to private moorage. And the only two reports that we were able to vote on was the Police Commission minutes and the Natural Resources Advisory Committee minutes. And that was it. Having said that, there was a board meeting that followed that, and there was a couple of zoning bylaw amendments and some recommendations from the committees. After that, I had an agenda planning committee for the infrastructure committee, which is taking place tomorrow. I happen to be vice chair of that committee, so water and meters is on that tomorrow. So that should be, I'm hoping it'll be well attended. People seem to have a concern about water and meters. I would hope that they will show up at the meeting. It will be interesting to hear what the debate is. Thank you. That concludes my report, Your Worship.
Thank you very much for that. I'll just add on the SCRD, it's actually the Regional Hospital District had a formal meeting with Minister Adrian Dix at UBCM, led by the chair of the hospital district, which is Frank Morrow, and they wanted to press the case, as we all do, for moving more quickly on seniors' long-term care on the Sunshine Coast and in Sechelt. And it was well received, but of course the minister doesn't have much to say about the fact that it's been delayed and delayed and delayed. And there, as he said when he was asked specifically about the timeline, he said as soon as possible, which means he doesn't know either. Sometimes these formal meetings are important because it does put it on the record, but I think the informal hallway meetings and reception meetings are equally as important, especially sometimes when you go into those informal meetings and they know you well because they were talking to you just the evening before or later. So we can move to correspondence. If I could, a motion to receive the council correspondence on item 12.1. Thank you, Councillor Mueller. And second, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? I'll just mention one. I brought this prop from the second, which is a letter from the BC Soccer Association, and they're starting a hashtag Respect All program, and a letter is attached to it. And they are having these cards at all of their soccer games across BC, and want us in the community to mention it again. And it's basically, remember, this is a game. Everyone's here to have fun. Officials are human, and I guess we have one official at the table who would know this, what this is like, and we have one athlete at the table who plays a lot of soccer, who said just before that we really need this on the Sunshine Coast. Be respectful. I think Noel said it's like 1 in 10 chance you're away from a fight at any given soccer game. So, they play hard. We know we all play hard in Sechelt. Even our politics are hard, though I might say something about that at some other time. But be respectful, especially on the soccer pitch. But I think all of us need to remember how important it is to keep things within civil bounds. And I will just say, when Councillor Shanks was thanking and welcoming and giving best wishes to every candidate in the room and all councillors, it reminded me that my very first foray into public life was with Councillor Shanks in 1996. And I don't think either of us could believe the gentleman's rules that were there now compared to 2018. And the morning after a civil but engaging and lively election campaign, Councillor Shanks was at my door to shake my hand and wish me well and to ensure that the business continued. And I'll never forget, because nobody uses that front door. They all go to the other door. Bang, bang, bang. And I went down, and there was Councillor Shanks with his hand extended. And we can't roll back the world, but the context of 2018 is, unfortunately, we really have to come back to this. Let's be respectful. Councillor Seegers and I are actually doing pretty well, I think. So we'll see what happens on the 21st. One of us will be knocking on somebody's door. Okay. Anything else on correspondence that needs to be pulled out? They've been acknowledged and dealt with. And a motion to receive the Sechelt Visitor Services statistics. Thank you, Councillor Seegers. Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? Any questions or things you'd like to pull out on that? And the Sunshine Coast RCMP detachment. Motion to receive. Thank you, Councillor Mueller and Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And a lot of red dots on that one, but most of them are in neighboring jurisdictions, but that's still part of our community. So the reds are increases. Motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright. All those in favor? That's carried. 20 after 8. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at our next meetings.